and welcome to today's OpenTeams community event. I'm Brian Skin, the Open Source Architect Community Manager here at OpenTeams, and I'll be your host today. OpenTeams is a single point of contact and procurement for your open source training, solutions, and support needs. Visit openteams.com or reach out to us at connect@openteams.com to learn more. As part of OpenTeams' overall mission to sustain and support open source, we are also sponsoring the Open Source Architect community with the goal of providing a dedicated space for experts to connect and collaborate over their favorite open source technologies. To learn more or to apply for membership, visit openteams.com/OSA-community. Panelists, if you would, go ahead and come online while I continue the intro here. Over the last year or so, we've observed an explosion of generative AI into the mainstream. New companies, new products, new tools. Innovation in the space is progressing incredibly quickly and faster than many or most of us can actually keep up with. While these AI tools hold a lot of promise, they also bring a lot of challenges, not least of which questions around how we as humans can successfully keep a solid grip on what these tools are, how they can be used, perhaps more importantly, how they can't or shouldn't be used, and how they can be beneficially integrated into our lives and our work. Today's event is a special joint production of OpenTeams, Data Society, and Credo AI, a conversation between Data Society CEO and co-founder Merav Yuravlivker, Credo AI CTO Eli Chen, and OpenTeams CEO Travis Oliphant. Each of these panelists brings a different perspective and different expertise to this question of finding the human in AI, as we'll dig into in a bit. Thanks again to everyone here for attending. Please post any questions you might have during the conversation into Zoom chat or Q&A. We'll address them in the flow of the conversation as we're able, or we've reserved a bit of time at the end for Q&A. We'll take as many as we can there. We are recording the event today, and that video will be available. All of the attendees and registrants will be notified once that is available after the event. All right, let's get started. Merav, Eli, Travis, welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
It's great to be here, Brian. Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.
Eli, great to see you both.
Great to see you too.
So very exciting topic, very relevant topic, and I, for one, am very interested to hear everything that all three of you have to say. So I think the best way to start might be to run around the loop and have each of you introduce yourself briefly, yourselves and your companies, and the interest and your expertise surrounding this humans plus AI topic. Merav, how about you start? Introduce yourself and Data Society.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Merav Yuravlivker. I'm CEO and co-founder of Data Society. In a nutshell, we help professionals use data better. We do that via our custom data training programs, where we help empower the workforce with the data skills that they need to be impactful. And we also do that with our custom technology solutions. We build platforms, predictive analytics, do data re-architecturing and everything else that needs to be done in order to make sure that the infrastructure is there to leverage the data that exists within an organization. Data Society is really passionate about ensuring that people know how to use data and that they know how to use it responsibly. So from our perspective, where we're coming at this, seeing the explosion and interest in generative AI is, one, how can we help individuals understand what this technology is? And two, how can we help them ensure that they are taking the appropriate precautions so that they're using it effectively without dampening the potential massive impact that it can have in a positive way.
Excellent, excellent. Eli, how about you, Credo AI?
Hi, everyone. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Credo AI. Our mission is to help companies, small and big, manage the risks of using AI and building with AI. So our product is a software framework for companies to adopt risk management for both machine learning and data science teams that are building internal models, to even employees that are using models for business or enterprise use cases. We're adopting a risk identification and mitigation strategy that companies can use using our software. And we started out in 2020, of course, working with mostly machine learning teams and enterprises. But in 2023, now has exploded the use of AI with generative AI, not just with data science teams, but essentially every employee of these companies. So there's been a strong demand for our product, and but the challenge has been even greater, which is it's no longer just a traditional machine learning data pipeline. It's actually becomes quite broad into identifying risks of general purpose systems, examples like LLMs, to apply to use cases that we are sometimes not even able to imagine. So a lot of this is working with our customers and adopting risk management frameworks to enterprise use cases. Quickly about my background, I'm a software engineer, been working in tech companies in Silicon Valley for over 20 years. But over the last 5 years or so, I've been pretty deep into neural networks and looking into how they work and identifying biases and hopefully surfacing risks so that companies could do something with this knowledge of these risks. Thank you all.
Indeed, very important application and tool. Travis, yourself, OpenTeams AI.
Yeah, let me see what I should chat about. Previous founder of Anaconda, previous creator of NumPy, SciPy, and have spent early part of my career doing a lot with open source communities. I was writing a lot of code earlier in my career, and lately, over the past decade, I've been more helping to create aligned incentives so more people can write more code that's community generated, community centric. So my mission, the thing I try to work on is helping connect open source communities with the opportunities that businesses need. So really helping those merge, kind of be an impedance transformer, and do that in a couple of ways. We've got a consulting company, Quansight, that is in the PyData space. We help people with all kinds of data-related problems, data visualization problems, and a tool we've been building called Nabari. It's an open source, basically an open source data integration platform. It's an open source getting started. If you want to build an MLOps platform, you want to build something off of the Jupyter, an open source Python community centered packages, you can pull it together with Nabari very easily. So it's getting started quickly. And we're using that to help people get started with creating their own LLM infrastructure, their own generative AI infrastructure. So people want to get started quickly with their own data. So we have something we're kind of calling Nabari templates for private AI, which is basically just a way to cookie cutter configure this open source tool called Nabari in a way so you can own your own data and you can make sure that you're using just what you need and the models you need. So that's Quansight. Then OpenTeams broadens the opportunity for companies to, instead of having to contract with 20 to 30 different vendors who provide open source expertise, we're a single place to go, a single contract, a single connection, and a single consistent way to ensure delivery of the results. And then we have a lot of vendors and people that we work with to make sure we cover the bases with all the best expertise out there. So that's the OpenTeams story, which broadens the Quansight story. But I care deeply about open source. I care deeply about technology. My background is actually science and applied math, and particularly inverse problems, which we taught neural networks. I taught kind of how they work, and for many years before they became popular. So deeply aware of the technology and the needs and how it works. Learning like everybody else what the implications are as it starts being used at scale. And what does that mean now that all of a sudden, from my perspective, it's like I've cared about array computing and some of these ideas for 30 years, and now the rest of the world cares too. And it's like, oh, welcome, that's cool. Everyone's here now. But this is a fun area. But of course, there's much more to learn. And it's like Eli brought up. Oh, all of a sudden now it's the sales and marketing department. It's that's using AI. And what does that mean? And how is that going to relate to what are there ethical implications? Are there procedural applications? Are there jobs going to be lost? Are there how, you can just see, and it's churning everybody's mind. So it's definitely an exciting time to be alive. It's an exciting time and sometimes that's a euphemism for terrifying, because we're all kind of going, wait a minute, the old ways of thinking, how is that going to be changing? So I really like the topic here, the finding the human AI, because I think ultimately what we know isn't changing is that humans don't change that quickly. We're still us, right? And I think what's maybe a little exciting is, can we learn more about us and who we are by we're pushing the machines to the envelope of what machines can do, and then that kind of helps us understand who we are. But that's getting into maybe the subject matter, but that's maybe a little bit about me.
No, that was actually a terrific transition into what we discussed as the first topic of discussion. we have this AI, a lot of people are attempting to use it, but are they using it well? What is generative AI in general, but also generative AI in particular, since that's the big thing of the day. What is it good at and what is it not? So let's start on the good side. What are, anybody can weigh in here. What are things that AI is good at, that we can trust it to do relatively well?
I could start, or
Yeah.
sorry, Travis, but I've been thinking about this recently. When we're talking about large language models and generative AI, I actually feel like it's really great at translation. And maybe it's due to the nature it's trained, its optimization objectives. But from what we've seen in use cases, when you have one input, maybe you could think of one language being translated to the other, it works really well with the transformer architecture, the embedding space. And it's just, we've seen that also as a good mental model of where large language models are quite successful. So you could think of this as summarizing, taking large wordy content and translating into another style, which is concise content. So when I say style, I'm also referring back to style transfer, if you're familiar with neural network days, but also transferring in terms of taking content that is complex and translating into something that's easy to, or using simple terms. That's something that's great at. I think this starts to touch on to what it's not good at, which is not translating. If you wanted to use it as a lookup table in a dictionary, well, that's translating sometimes involves temperature and sampling and randomness, and then you run into issues with, is the translation a lookup table in the database, or is it a translation into something that's similar? But in any case, I'm focusing back on what it's really good at is translation, in terms of just think of all the use cases that we use humans for translating. This is a really, I believe, a superpower of LLMs right now.
Yeah, AI is a general term. Then of course we have specific generative AIs that are essentially bigger neural nets. AIs are neural nets. AI, machine learning in general, is really good at estimating a nonlinear function, right? Anything you can do a map between one space and another space. If you can define the problem like that, if you can say, here's my input, here's my output, and you can clearly define that, and then you have enough data, you can build a neural net to do that. That's pretty cool, because we can think of a lot of nonlinear functions. Here's the nonlinear function. Give me a collection of words that somebody inputs, and then I want an output that's what word would come next. Based on all the historical words in the world, like all the content in the world. I kind of want the word that is most likely to come next from something I say. Like, oh, that's a function I can define. I can define that function. Let me build an AI to do that function. That's what LLMs are. Large language models are basically that function, right? I want the most likely word to come next. Now there's some nuances there. They actually don't pick exactly the most likely word. There's a little bit of heat there. But when you realize that AI can do anything like that, it starts to open up a world of, we went suddenly, from my perspective, because I've known about that kind of capability for many, many years, but it's hard to do. It's really expensive to do. The training is enormous. It takes a lot of compute power. It takes a lot of data. Aggregating the data is hard. Now, of course, with as the technology revolution matured, we get Moore's law keeps us into tighter and tighter, more and more memory in smaller and smaller places, more and more compute that we've learned to parallelize more and more and more. All of a sudden, you get that threshold where, I can do this compute. And now this is possible, even though it's just incremental from where we've always been. The thing that's interesting, and now at the scale, there's a lot of things that are all of a sudden emerging. They're like, I hadn't thought that would be an issue. Like, people think they understand a problem theoretically, but then when you apply it practically, all of a sudden, all this other stuff comes out. It's kind of the difference between theoretical physics and applied engineering. Like, I didn't think to worry about that particular thing. And all of a sudden that becomes the core element. So right now, AI is full of that, full of all this stuff, even though foundationally, it's just really good at a nonlinear function matching. So we went from linear, like for many, many years, it's just linear, all we could do, linear regression. And people were using linear regression. They still are in lots of places. Then we had, let's go to logistic regression. Now it's like, we can do nonlinear regression on any particular functional form you like with these elements, as we have enough data and have enough parameters. Oh, now what? That's what it's really good at. It's really, really, really massive functions, a lot of variables. We can talk about what it's bad at. What it's bad at is everything else. So anyway, but that's what it's really good at.
Merav, thoughts there?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll build on to those answers. And at a high level, the way that I like to describe it is it's really good at quantifying relationships in the world around us, which we as humans are sometimes not the best at. It doesn't have any of that context, right? Which can be bad, and it can also be good when you're looking to zero in on a specific pattern or relationship you're trying to identify. There are two case studies that came up for me as Eli was talking about that I thought really exemplify where some of this power of generative AI comes from. One is in the customer service realm. There was a study that was done recently where a large language model was trained up on the responses of all of these customer agents, the top customer agents that were done internally. And then there was a chatbot that was created that was available to all customer service agents. So as they were talking to their customers and the clients, if there was a question that came up that they weren't sure how to handle, they would type in that question into that chatbot and get a response based on the best practices of these more experienced individuals. And what they found was that customer service wise, they were able to handle, I think, 14% more inquiries with a higher satisfaction rate and a higher satisfaction rate of those customer service agents. So typically there's a high turnover, the turnover went down because those newer employees felt much more supported because they had access to all this information that would have been much harder to get. It's a lot harder to go up to a much more experienced team member and say, hey, can you help me with this when they're busy? It's a lot easier if there's a chatbot. You can just type it in and get the response that you would have gotten from them anyways. So that's one example. It's disseminating this type of best practice information within organizations to help support people and lessen that gap, that information gap. There's another couple of examples that I was reading about in healthcare, where doctors were sometimes having a difficult time conveying diagnoses in a way that was empathetic. And I read an article about this doctor that used, ChatGPT, which is one of the more popular platforms out there right now, to provide an answer to response about a particular course of treatment to a family. And he had tried, one time, tried again, didn't work. And then he used ChatGPT. He came back, he gave that response, and the family was much, much more understanding. I also read another case in which a doctor used a generative AI platform to develop a letter to insurance about why one of their patients needed a specific treatment. And so we're talking about potentially being able to facilitate communication and lessen the amount of manual work that goes on, which is a huge capability of AI, is to do something that's even repetitive, to do something even with a little bit of more quote unquote creativity, and lessen the amount of time that doctors spend on paperwork so they can in theory spend more time with their patients. So those are just two examples of how this technology has been used quite recently in order to support the way that people are working today. And it's pretty exciting to see.
Indeed. Any further thoughts on that angle, or any particular thoughts on the extended thoughts on AI false?
I would just love to point out that because it's there's what AI can do generally, which is kind of what I was describing, and then there's what are the current crop of LLMs or the current crop of image generators, what are they doing today? And that's a much more practical, like, okay, and I love the experiences that Merav was giving, like, because that's how we learn that. Like, what are people using it for today? Because it's kind of like, it's a little unclear because we don't really know how does language work. I mean, what's interesting to me is how by producing a really, really good predictor of next word as an AI, the attention algorithm as a way to efficiently produce that, that's effectively what attention did, is it made kind of equivalent to what convolutional neural networks did for image processing. It took the general problem of here's a big old neural network. How do I organize it a little better so that attention algorithm can actually produce this large language model effectively? I mean, today instead of 50 years from now. right? And that's impressive. And then what's interesting to me is, oh, that large language model all of a sudden looks like it's passing Turing tests, right? Which to me, which is, oh, we need to update our question of what general intelligence looks like, because we know a large language model, that's really impressive, but maybe we're not just a large language model. Although it does appear that humans at least have something like a large language model going on inside of us. It's just one of many subroutines running, though. I think that's one thing that's becoming clear, is that humans are a lot of things stitched together into an interesting conflagration that we don't fully understand yet. But perhaps by building these other machines, we'll learn more. But practically, there's a lot of possibility with the current jet batch of LLMs. I have more experience with the LLMs personally than I do with generative AI. Some of my colleagues have done a lot with image generation and with audio generation. And I think it's very exciting to see what's happening there. But I personally don't have a lot of, I've just seen people make really funny mashups of, people basically take me and put me in with the Sesame Street characters or with Star Trek. That was my favorite one, actually. My wife liked that one, where they made a picture of me and pretending to look like I was Captain Picard or Captain Kirk, for the Star Trek fans out there. Like I wish.
Another positive use.
Another positive use, exactly. I thought that was, it was a little bit campy, but it was like, you can, so that's the ability to replicate images and audio and video is fascinating, but also a little dangerous. How does anybody on this conference know that we haven't just done that? We haven't, I promise, cross my heart. I can say something AI would never know. But ultimately we're rapidly approaching where you're going to see stuff, and how do you know it's real?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do you know it wasn't generated by a prompt?
Yeah, that's one thing that comes to mind. A question to ask all of you, with the emergence of the generative AI, the LLMs in the last year or so, everyone's been grappling with them. What are these? How do we use them? I'm curious for all three of you individually, and then also in your business activities. How have you tried, when did you, what was your course of discovery on them? When did you oh, wait, this is a real thing. I need to take this seriously. What successful and unsuccessful uses have you tried to make of them? What's been the on-ramp that has motivated this event? Why the understanding that the bridging the human and the AI is something we have to consciously work on. What has that experience been like for each of you?
Yeah, I can start there. We are a technology company at heart with a fantastic, technical, curious team. So for us, we've been working on this for a little while, and I think if you talk to folks in the technology space, generative AI has been around for a long time, just like data science and machine learning have been around for a very, very long time. People just might have called it statistics instead of data science, right? So we're rebranding that a little bit. The way that we've used it is helping us build content. So we do a lot of educational programs, both in the federal space and in the commercial space. And we like to tailor our content to those individual organizations, so we can use generative AI to do that. We do have a specific process, and we can go into more, what are the checks and balances that we use to make sure that everything that we use is accurate, is biased, is sound pedagogically, and then sound technically. But it's a really good first draft, and that's how we have approached it as a company, is saying, if this can take time off of your plate by creating a first draft, by all means. But here are the checks and balances that you need to go through, and the steps you need to go through before we sign off on any product that has that as a base. So, and that's how we talk to clients about it as well. Nothing that ever comes out of an LLM or a generative AI model should be a final. There always needs to be those human elements involved. And that's how we approach it. But we're really excited about it. We're working on a couple of different things internally to add on to our learning platform. And it's exciting. I think there's a lot of people who are nervous. I like to think of this as the invention of the internet again, right? 20, 30 years ago, people were saying, everybody's going to lose their jobs. What's happening to our world? Yes, it substantially shifted things. some people did lose their jobs, but then there were new jobs. Like social media manager was not a thing 20 years ago, and obviously it is now, right? So I think we're going through another one of those evolutions where our world is going to shift. There's going to be some people who may lose their jobs, but there will be other jobs created from it, and we will make those adjustments as a society. So, we're approaching this with a lot of curiosity, a lot of excitement, and then with a healthy dose of those checks and balances that we need.
Yeah, I think that's excellent, Merav. That matches kind of our experience as well. That basically AI, the generative AI, generative LLM, generative AI tools today are awesome first draft, going from 0 to 1, the blank page syndrome, helping people just get started. But ultimately, whether it's code that's being created or a blog that's being created, the person who is approving and shipping that blog, I'm very suspicious of anything that's just hooking up an AI directly to the internet, like directly to a feed. We can talk about that. We've been experimenting with that at OpenTeams, for example, quite a bit actually. And there was a funny little episode that happened where one group felt like another group was using AI too much, and so they basically wrote an AI blog post to criticize the work of another AI blog post. So we have the kind of human-mediated AIs fighting each other, which I thought was actually fantastic. That's great. I mean, if basically you're able to amplify your capability, but I think the important thing as a society we have to recognize is the person is still accountable. Like it's almost like you're in a fight. Imagine fight night or something. And you have big machines you're inside of, and the machines are hitting each other really hard, but still the person inside is still responsible. It's like that Avatar movie, right, where the big robots that the person was in charge of. There was a thing, there was an intelligence, there was something in charge that was still accountable. So I think definitely one part of human and AI is no matter what the content is, what the creation is, there's an accountability to a person or to a team or that produces it. So I think that's a great principle that we've also been establishing. But I think ultimately AIs are going to be like that. They'll be like these really empowering tools that we use that help us interact with the world, and we'll need them on both sides. So, but we've been using it for content generation, using it for job post construction. Anytime where there's a lot of text to produce, that's hard. It's hard to get it out. Book authoring, book first draft of a book construction. Sales, the sales team has used AI to put emails together that help understand a particular person. Kind of a craft an email message to somebody. These are all ways we've been using it now today, and kind of, I would say, still experimenting. Like I don't think everything we're doing is still like, well, we need to adjust it, change it. Like I said, because these internal battles. And then code's another big one actually, and I'm talking on Friday to a group about the future of programming implied by AI. Again, not coming as some expert because I'm learning along with everybody else, but one thing that becomes very clear there is it's similar. There's a lot of tedious coding tasks that AI can do, things like code coverage, things like test writing, writing tests, which used to be really painful, but you can actually have AI write all your tests. Review this code and write a bunch of tests to help this code. That could potentially be very useful. So writing tests, helping write APIs to frameworks. Like I think what's going to be more and more important is you're going to need more and more people to write great frameworks. To write, where's the PyTorches out there, the NumPys, the Pandas, the Polars. I mean, somebody's got to go out there and build a thing, and AI is not going to do that yet. And probably not for many years, but it may help the next person to write their framework. It may help them, but ultimately someone's write that framework. Once you have a framework, an API, the AI can call it. The AI can set up calls to those APIs pretty well, right? So it empowers other people to take advantage. So I think a big innovation area is going to be user interfaces, user experiences. All of a sudden, it's not about, I've got to build this perfect widget set so that a person can interact with that widget set. I can have a UI that's kind of just talk to me. Like we're much closer to the realm, like farther than I thought we'd be, honestly, to the Scotty of the enterprise. Computer, do this. Like that's actually not that far away, and you can imagine most people saying that's the interface. Is it the best interface always? Good question. Who knows, right? Maybe it's not that efficient, honestly. It's more efficient to have we'll see, right? So I'm excited by that part of, giving computing to more people. through the use of these LLM-supported AI user interfaces.
Indeed. So Eli, your on-ramp had to have been from a unique perspective with the risk element that Credo is bringing to it. What was your experience?
Yeah, it's been fascinating because when we talk about AI, well, actually, to point back to Travis's point about the human and AI, we actually firmly believe in that, and we actually call it governance. We see governance as either human in the reviewing of AI work or human overseeing AI work. And traditionally, before 2023, it was about machine learning teams building automation through training models on data sets, doing predictions. And this was supposed to automate a lot of the tasks in the enterprises. And we would think about governance in terms of making sure that these automations, it's still reviewed, it's still fitting within compliance rules or aligning to the values of the company, right? You don't want automation that does something that is surprising or completely doing something that is unethical. And we've seen that in the past. But for 2023, we saw an explosion of usage where I think it's really the shift between narrow AI, built for specific purposes, that something that is more general that can be applied through many different use cases. And I also agree. I think part of this innovation is the user interface change through instruction fine-tuning that allows using language to talk to an LLM and ask it through either few shot or zero shot examples to ask it to do things. And this suddenly allowed AI to be used by a wide variety of people. And just a little technical footnote, GPT 3.5 before instruction tuning was actually around since 2020. It was this following instruction user interface that unlocked what we see now in 2023. What we hear from our customers in this explosion of just new use cases are not just what are the best practices in using this new technology so that it could be more efficient, but very pointedly, how do I mitigate the risks that I'm very worried about? Some of the ways that they started mitigating the risk is to ban ChatGPT in the workforce, ban use of image generation services, because they just first they try to say, we don't know the risk, we don't know what the best use case is, let's just ban it. But our customers didn't see that working because customers were or their employees were using it on their mobile phones or using other accounts to they call that shadow usage. Now they're looking at specific ways to mitigate the controls. And the ones that we are keeping on top of mind are the very prominent use cases. For example, code generation. There are IP issues where if the code model that you're using create either open source software that you're not attributing to the source to, or has license issues that in traditional software companies has license check and control compliance controls that need to be applied for code generation LLMs, to things like copywriting. If you're using LLMs for copywriting, you do have to do fact checking. You do have to put human in the loop to do sanity checks for bias and toxicity, for example. These are controls that actually involve putting human in the loop in terms of putting additional workflows. And these are just best practices that we've come to our customers to say, when you're using new technologies, it's useful to identify risk and then find ways to mitigate risk. I think what's interesting is there still needs to be a lot of education that's needed in the workforce and the employees about fit for purpose is how we've been describing it. These are currently great tools, but they need to be evaluated fit for purpose. They do great things, but you do have to be educated on what are the risks and where are good ways to use these tools. And there are actually best practices that involve either education or using of additional tools to make sure that these LLMs and these generative AI tools are fit for purpose. But once you do that, we are really excited about the productivity gains that can be gained from using these new neural networks. Personally, for example, I've mentioned that I've doubled my productivity from using GPT-4 in my daily programming, and but there's still a lot of expertise I gained from using the tool for many hours. It didn't come from the beginning. I had to get quite good at it, and it's something that we hope to share with the rest of the world.
Yeah, I've heard that from a few people too, actually, Eli, and understand that with my own use, which hasn't been a lot of programming, but it actually helps me program today where I wouldn't be able to, because the APIs are changing so rapidly. But what's interesting is the level of experience needed to really improve your productivity versus if you just put ChatGPT in the hands of just somebody who's not that experienced, it can definitely increase productivity, but does quality suffer? Are they just putting out? And I had that a little bit with my children, where I've watched them use ChatGPT to help them with programming. It definitely helped them, but there was also a proliferation of what I would call bad code. Like it's very easy to sort of have a lot of code out there that just isn't well architected, and it could be a compounding problem. Like if the next generation of LLMs are trained on kind of copy of copy. So it's kind of the importance of expertise, but how do you get that expertise integrated is still a challenge. Like how do you do that? So I've seen that same experience. It can absolutely help people who have experience be more productive. But how do we use that to actually get more people with expertise?
I'll give you a concrete example that I love telling. I help my wife with doing some PTA work. They have a spreadsheet in a CSV file. And one of the first ways that people start thinking of using AI is to say, like, ask questions on the CSV. So we tried doing that. She got excited because you could say, give me all the parents who have this attribute in the table. But people don't actually know that that's error prone, right? It started hallucinating, and then of course this is the point. Like people start either losing trust in the AI, or they shoot themselves in the foot by using this in production, using this for actual outbound communication. There's actually a much better way, which is to ask the LLM to generate code to process the CSV to create the outputs that you want. It's the same output, but one is actually much more robust. You could use human verification by looking at the code to do some governance to make sure it's doing the right thing, and then it's fantastic now. So
I like that a lot. Yeah, I think that's and can we generalize that to other principles? Another quick anecdote. Sorry, Merav, just really quickly, because it reminded me of the very
No, this is
how
great.
I use it for coding, which I had my son was doing work for an engineering firm. He's a young intern, and he was trying to use essentially cubic spline code. So code to produce a cubic spline and try to determine, compute cubic splines. Okay, great. He actually went to ChatGPT, and ChatGPT actually knew about a recursive algorithm that was, I didn't really know about that recursive algorithm to generate splines. And it actually knew even a little bit about NumPy. It used NumPy to generate part of it, but it came out with, but it doesn't know array programming. Like there haven't been enough examples of good array programming in the wild for it to learn how to do array programming well. And by array programming, I mean thinking in higher dimensions and writing simpler code to look down columns and aggregate it in higher dimensions. It didn't do that. So he wrote decent code. It was okay, but with a little bit of, maybe a 20-minute tweak, we sped it up by 30x, 30 times. And then also it didn't, it was more error prone. So it's a very simple example of, not in this case wrongness, but an improvement. Now you're describing something I think is really critical. Actually, Stephen Wolfram from Wolfram Alpha has been saying this too. And he was one of the first to integrate Wolfram Alpha with ChatGPT, so that ChatGPT is generating code so then you have a formal knowledge system. I've also heard, and I can't verify this, I don't know, that Google is doing something very similar with their approach. They're actually trying to tie the production of AI to a knowledge base, more of a prescribed output. So the output's coming from something that you can have a little more confidence in, because you can also see what the AI generated to produce the source to produce that output. So we'll see, but that is interesting. It still makes me, like, even there, I think the human need is on that review of the output, like we've been saying. Like you can't get away from that right now. And I think, so LangChain, some of these things like LangChain and chatbots, I've seen a lot of proliferation of people advertising, just hook up ChatGPT to your, and do bot automated stuff, and that actually goes, I don't know who would do that or why you would do that. That sounds like a recipe for a lot of problems. Now I could see it generating an algorithm as long as you have somebody reviewing what it's doing at every stage.
Right.
So again, the human has to still review and govern. I love the concept of governance.
Then that's part of the, how do the humans know how to govern? There was a great question in chat about that. It's like, yes, there's all of the technological developments happening and, human in the loop. But what happens if the humans that you have in the loop don't know how to accurately, if you don't know enough about the LLMs or the machinery to know where the pitfalls are? That probably falls into your bailiwick, Merav, right? Helping upskill and train folks to know what they're doing when they're working with these systems.
Oh yes, that's been a lot of conversations that we've been having with our clients and with our partners, because I think there's this tendency that we have as humans where we see something and we just want to believe that it's magic and it's good, and okay, we're just going to use this now. Here's a widget, we're just going to use this. We saw that with machine learning and data science, where a bunch of folks thought data is the data, and therefore whatever the data tells me I will believe, right? As opposed to thinking about, hey, where did this data come from? How is it collected? What are the assumptions made in the model, right? All of these checks that could make results go in a bunch of different directions. And we're seeing the same thing happening again, where folks are saying, AI, it's intelligence, it's in the name, right? So therefore, whatever it's telling me, I'll just take it and I'll use it. What we've been doing and the way that we approach mitigating that, it's a lot of education. Like, I'm an educator at heart. I started my career in the classroom, and helping people understand, just as I think Travis was saying, this isn't magic. Here's how it happens. Here's the data that you need. Here's the amount of energy that it takes. And here's where it goes wrong, right? Here's where data goes bad. Hallucinations is something that we mentioned. So explaining how those hallucinations happen, and talking also about liability, giving a little bit of that fear so people will check their work. There was a case, I don't know if you all saw, of these two lawyers. I think this was a personal injury case. These two lawyers used ChatGPT to submit a response, and in it, it cited sources and cases that didn't exist. These lawyers did not go over that information. They did not check those sources, and they were fined. I think their licensure is under review now because they submitted something that had false sources to it. So we have to help people understand the accountability that they have. That I think is a super a very big component, because if you cause harm, right? Let's say you create a model that's biased, and it disproportionately harms people, right? There was a case in the Netherlands where the government was using an algorithm to apportion out funds for Social Security and different benefits, and it was disproportionately rejecting individuals from immigrant communities because of the historical data that existed. So they sued, a group that represented them sued, and the government's no longer allowed to use that algorithm. The government's still responsible. You can't point at an algorithm and say, the algorithm made me do it. It's just not going to fly. So making sure that people understand the accountability that they have, what are the checks and balances that they need, and the framework. So what we like to do is we have a list of questions and in like a checklist format that people can go through and just say, okay, did I check the data sources? Did we go through this? Did we go through that? And it doesn't have to be complicated, right? I think just some of those key pieces to let people know, along with the foundation of how this technology works, will help combat, I think, a vast majority of these cases where harm can come if a human is not intervening in the correct way. So for us, it's all about just empowering people with that information in order to make the right decisions moving forward.
It seems to me there, and Merav, you may have experience with this, kind of a seminar or a course on, AI, what you need to know about AI for policy making or for accountability for decision making. You're not going to be just if you're running a business or responsible for something, like, what do you need to know about AI so that you understand when people are because it's very much easier to get snowballed a little bit, I think, because people sort of say, oh, this is what are the list of questions you can ask? What are the list of things just to help people keep up? I think one of the key things on my mind is we need to empower people with the kind of leveled up their ability to understand their role, what the tool is doing. And it's a powerful tool, but it's just a tool at the end of the day. You know, humans have been using tools for
Exactly.
thousands of years to augment our ability in the world, right? This is, in some sense, not really any different than that, right? It just happens to be now that we're starting to get to the bottom of, well, maybe some of the parts of our own consciousness we're replicating, right? But all we're doing so far is replicating parts of it. And we have not replicated a human at all, right? In fact, I'm of the opinion that we don't understand enough about what a human is. We're still 50 years away. Now, maybe it'll be sooner, but we have to get many, many more pieces working together before we have something even near approaching a human. In the meantime, we have to recognize that people are still, it's working together, and it's our own interactions that matter. So I care a lot about how do we educate people of all kinds, you know, and I've long been a proponent of, you know, helping everybody learn what part of programming you need to know. Been a big proponent. One of the reasons we built Anaconda was to make it easier for people to get the tools and recognize you don't have to be a computer scientist or a programmer to understand programming, the idea of logic and the idea of just stitching function calls together. There's easy programming everybody does in their day-to-day. Similar with, I think AI is even making that easier. So do you have courses like that, or are there kind of seminars? I think that would be a really good thing to kind of teach more people about what they need to know, all kinds of things.
Can I just ask a quick question while you bring this up, Merav and Travis? What do you think about the necessity of teaching how to use these tools versus abstracting the tools away so that folks don't need to use it, similar to things like driving a car and not needing to know how engines work? I think this is, I've dealt with this in my career with no code and no code application development and coding, and I actually don't have a good answer for this, but I'm curious for your thoughts.
Good point.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I definitely drive a car, and here's what I know about an engine. I know the fundamentals of how an engine works. Like if you ask me to go and repair an engine, that would be a whole other story. But when I think about it from the AI perspective, and Travis, we do have these types of seminars and workshops specifically about AI, using it responsibly and things like that. And that's been really fun for us to build and deliver. We're not teaching people how to build a neural network. Like I think most people don't need to know how to do that, but we are teaching them what a neural network is at a high level and why it's so difficult to explain to some extent, depending on the number of layers that you have and the complexity of the data. And helping them know what questions to ask, in my mind, is the most important piece. The way that we approach all of our programs, it's solution first and not tool first, right? So what is the actual issue that you're having? You know, and then Travis, don't kill me, whether you're using R or Python, right? You do most of the same thing. So it's also a question of what's the ecosystem around it, right? And how does that fit into the other objectives that you're using? So for me, I think it's much more important to understand just the larger components, not digging in deep, and then really focusing on the role that an individual has. You know, if I am a team member in an organization, what's my responsibility about the data that we're using? What's my responsibility to ask these questions? And easier said than done, right? I think it's also incredibly important that leadership step up and say, you know, this is what we're doing. We expect all of you to be accountable for this. And we're not going to punish you for bringing us a problem, because that's when a lot of issues happen, is when somebody raises their hand and goes, hey, like, I think there's a problem with this. And they go, well, our shareholders are expecting this to come out and we've put in X amount of hours and X time, so we're going to run it anyways. And, you know, there's no problem. That's when organizations tend to get in trouble. So creating an environment and a community where speaking up is welcome, and you know, people have the ability to really dig in. I think I went on a little bit of a tangent there, but that was a great question, Eli, just to think about what is the knowledge that we're going to need moving forward. And just a really side tangent, for kids that are growing up today, like what do they actually need to know versus what might they not need to learn? As an example, I had a bunch of phone numbers memorized because there were no cell phones, right? How many people know how more than two phone numbers, right? I don't need to have that information because it's all in my pocket. So what information will our kids have to know versus not, because they could just bring it up on their phone or their
That's
laptop or some side of a Google Glass, whatever's happening,
what a fantastic comment. I think ultimately that is what has to be reshaped more than anything is our whole approach to education. I think that's going to take 20 years, honestly, because education, I've been an educator in the high college place, in the professorship place. My mother was an elementary school educator. My sister is a principal in elementary school. So I really care about that. I'd love to do more there, but I think that's going to have to change. And it's going to take, there's not a lot of money to be made there, so it's going to have to be a lot of just passion projects, right? But
Yeah.
helping the education system, the curriculums need to be updated. Like I would say right now, what is missing from our curriculum is probability theory at the early ages. Like everybody in 8th grade should know what Bayes rule is. By the time you hit 8th grade, you should have a pretty good sense of logical thinking and Bayes rule, right? The fact that that isn't part of our curriculum is a problem. The other thing I think that's desperately missing is our awareness of large scale systems and kind of how, we're not oriented to understand the role that markets play, that actually the price systems play and how it actually helps us coordinate at scale. Like people growing up, I didn't understand this, didn't know this until I was in my 30s, right? But by the time I was in 8th grade, I should have understood that economics, basically. We need more economic literacy. And it's controversial because lots of people have different economic theories, but let's get the fundamental piece. Just the idea of here's a concept that everybody can understand. Lots of debate still, but let's get this one concept people understand. I think the education system is, and right now, honestly, you can get a better topical education on YouTube, but you can't get but you don't get facilitation. Like what's still necessary and humans are going to be needed for forever in education is the facilitation. Nobody actually can just go and be stuck in front of YouTube and learn. They're going to learn stuff, but they won't understand how to integrate it, how it's applied. They won't have the practical examples. They won't be able to you won't understand. So there's still plenty of humans needed to help us together learn. And I think education, I'd love to see education reframed from this thing you do when you're younger and you get certified to a thing you're doing your whole life. And it's more of a consistent part of you're always learning and you're always getting, and certifications can come and it's awesome. But we have a bit of even as a person who got a PhD and was a professor, I was like, this class system thing isn't that helpful. We need lots of people learning and we need a lot more learning to take place.
So actually going back, I think it sort of relates to that prior topic, but going back to Travis, what you were talking about tools and more complex and less complex tools. And one part, the few minutes we have left, on the one hand, the element of AI is a tool it's not just a hammer with one point of use. And if you make a mistake, your thumb hurts and you've done something wrong. It seems like that's one of the difficulties with AI as a tool is it's not always obvious that you've used it wrong, and that comes later. And then another element of it is part of the reason why that's the case is that these new tools are more human-like. No one's going to mistake a hammer for a human, but many people are regularly mistaking ChatGPT, can be mistaking it for a human. So like just a little bit of thought on that humans and AI connection. What do we do when our tools are becoming so human-like that we have trouble telling that they're tools? Uh-oh. Education? Experience? I mean, I suppose that's one of the big questions of the day.
For me, decentralization, like that's one of the things, having more people at the table with power. Like one of the things that happens and has happened with the internet that what was sad to me was the thing exciting about the internet was the fact that it empowered everybody to have a page, right? Everybody could have an email. Everybody could push and participate in a broad conversation. Of course, that's hard, right? Because then, how do we even filter that? How do we process that? So that's created some more centralization. Today, the internet is far more centralized than the ideation of the internet was back when I was younger, right? But I think with AI, we have a similar problem where like you have to make sure that you're not just being funneled through one mindset. Like that's the one thing, I mean, humans are diverse in our thinking and in our worldview, even in our sense of what's right and what's wrong. Like that's one of the most fundamental things I think you have to learn as you're growing up. And I'm a religious person. I grew up with a pretty strong worldview and religious belief set. One of the things I learned very early on was other people won't agree with me, but they're still awesome people, right? And even though they don't have my exact same framing, there's a lot of stuff we share, and let's find those common elements we share and stop and not badger them for the things we disagree on. Let's build on our common belief. I think that fundamentally, like rehumanizing, that's the element of humanity that's so wonderful, is actually our ability to be so diverse in our thinking, but our ability to cooperate even still. Like that to me is the miracle of the past thousands of years. Like people would war over difference of beliefs, but now we actually have found a plateau and a place where a lot of the world can cooperate more than it wars. We cooperate at scale fantastically. Can we emphasize that? And maybe AI can help us, right? Maybe AI can help us actually be more human with each other and tolerate people a little bit stronger, but learn from each other too, because it's a give and take. And my beliefs have changed over my lifetime because of the people I've interacted with who think a little differently than me. So it's so valuable and so important.
That's so inspirational. And I do believe the open source efforts on LLMs, larger models, more capable models, is giving us more ability to understand these neural networks and their capabilities, like specifically being able to use the white box nature of open models to probe it more versus closed API models that unfortunately some companies in this space are using hype to make these systems more human-like than they actually are. And the hype is not helpful, especially when we're talking about risk identification and mitigation. But that's a tough question. I don't actually have anything.
That's another good topic, actually. The role of hype, the role of marketing hype and venture capital hype. Because that would be a deeper, maybe a separate panel or discussion on the funding mechanisms behind AI.
Yeah.
But anyway, great point, Eli.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, any particular thoughts, Merav?
I do have particular thoughts. You know, the way that I see it, we are coming up on a crossroads where sooner than later, more content on the internet will be generated by AI than by humans. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, right? I think it is what it is. It's the way that we wield it that defines it. And in order for us to be able to distinguish between these different tools, I do think policy will have a big role to play here. For example, if you come across a website, should it be branded in some way to say, okay, generated by AI, mostly generated by AI versus mostly generated by humans? Is that something that we need to adopt as a standard on the internet? Maybe, I don't know. In terms of government and sorting through grants and proposals, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day who's in the government, and he said that typically they publish some sort of a response and they get maybe a few hundred comments. I think they got over 20,000 comments. Okay, it's not that humans suddenly woke up and said, this is interesting. I think you have a bunch of people saying, it's going to take me 30 seconds to create a nice response here, and I'm going to get on the radar of the government, right, to be able to respond potentially to a future proposal opportunity. So you also have an overwhelming amount of data, and then the question becomes, how do we as humans sift through it? And then it's a bit tautological. Do we need to use generative AI to sift through the generative AI comments? And where does the human come in there? So I think it's going to be a concerted effort. I think we're going to make a lot of mistakes, and eventually we will come up with some sort of a system to help us identify what's been created by generated AI versus not. But it's going to be a long road. We're definitely far away from there. And I'll leave it at that because I know we are actually running up against the clock.
Yes. So there were a couple of questions that came in, but I think they worked in nicely into the discussion. So that's why I just let us run to the buzzer. Yeah, we've hit the top of the hour. Let's call it there. Merav, Eli, Travis, thank you so much for the time today. It was extremely, extremely interesting, and I hope everyone in the audience felt the same way. Thank you to those of you who attended. As I noted, the event is being recorded, and we'll have that out to all registrants and attendees as soon as we can. Visit openteams.com to learn more about OpenTeams, and as well the other websites for Data Society and Credo AI for their offerings as well. And we hope to see you next time. Thank you all. Appreciate it. Have a good one.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, everyone.